I'm Justin Fall.
And I'm Wes Fall, and we are the Fall Brothers.
We would like to personally thank you for taking the time to watch our newly released director's cut version of Belly of the Beast. This was by far one of the most challenging films we've ever made, and we want to encourage everyone to watch this with an open mind, as the contents of this film will definitely challenge much of what you've been taught and even believed over the years.
This is a one-of-a-kind film that exposes the deep state in a way that hasn't been done before, and we will present many images and visuals that have long been lost in the black vault of historical revisionism. We recommend that you take notes and research every claim for yourself. Please, don't just take our words at face value.
This film contains some graphic material that may be unsuitable for younger viewers. Unfortunately, the graphic nature of this content is necessary in exposing the harsh realities of the film's claims, so parental guidance is strongly suggested.
We thank you again for your time and interest in our director's cut version of Belly of the Beast.
We've got a lot to cover, so let's go ahead and start the adventure.
We've been told that America is a Christian country from its origin, one nation under God. We've been taught that our government is for the people, by the people, and that our party system is set up to provide checks and balances. We've been sold the American dream of fireworks on the 4th of July, manicured lawns and white picket fences. We've lived with the mindset of safety and peace, trusting that our leaders are protecting and preserving our best interests. But what if it's all been just a grand deception? What if the God, worshipped in secret by government leaders in our nation's capital, is in fact our enemy? And many of our leaders have been venerating him secretly through arcane rituals, setting the scene for the incarnation of this ancient entity. What if everything we thought we knew about this great nation was designed to bring about the greatest conspiracy of all time? A conspiracy for the souls of humanity. What if I told you that America was founded by the darkest elite secret societies, and that there are still powerful remnants, active elements, controlling hands in high positions, carrying this torch, and that your apple pie was just a dream?
It is in America that the transformation will take place, and has already commenced.
World democracy was the prominent dream of the classical occult philosophers, and it was well known in their circles that thousands of years ago, the mystical orders of Egypt knew of the Western Hemisphere, and specifically a great continent. This continent was America. It was during this time that a bold resolution was made, declaring that this Western continent should become the site of the coming philosophic empire of the world. Now, scholars and historians can't agree on specific dates for this arcane declaration, although it would have been before the time of Plato, based on veiled references in his works.
The Greek biographer Plutarch described ancient voyages that portray this great continent in the Western Hemisphere being visited by the ancient Greeks. They not only reached our shores, but explored part of the Great Lakes area. Through symbolism they preserved in mythology, their knowledge of this very continent we call America, which the ancient polytheistic Greeks called blessed. This continent was anciently set apart for coming generations in the great human experiment of the democratic commonwealth. This great continent would become the New World, the New Atlantis, or what Jeremiah the prophet called the hindermost of the nations.
There has seemingly always been religious persecution, specifically involving the dark arts of magic and occult mystery schools throughout the centuries. It was common for kingdoms to outlaw these types of practices in the public eye, for different political reasons. So in order for a nation to fulfill the esoteric prophecies, it must first offer freedom to practice the old religions of the world. Furthermore, when we consider this freedom of religion declared in America's foundation, we now understand that this had absolutely nothing to do with protecting Christianity, as we've been told, but was rather a cloak for the occult societies to freely advance, officiating their long prophesied philosophic empire of the world. America would be a soil rich for the dawning of the new order of the ages, or as declared by our founders, the Novus Ordo Seclorum.
The occult was spreading quickly in the West by the late 1600s, drawing many settlers from all over the world, offering them a safe haven to seek out and practice the ancient arts. Many forms of Babylonian and Egyptian magic, astrology, Kabbalah, polytheistic paganism, and the likes of such were prevalent. And of course, Christianity was also present. In addition, a hybrid mystical version of Christianity was quite popular in those days. Moving forward on the timeline, the celebrated founding fathers by majority are known to have been a mixture of secret society occultists, deists, and even universal spiritualists with a side of Christianity. They tactfully aimed at cultivating the prophesied New World, where the new order of enlightenment would radiate as a beacon of light to all the nations of the world.
Interesting is the belief that America is the land previously known in the ancient world as Atlantis. But regardless if there's any truth to that, we have an ironic bit of overlooked history I think we should mention here. Many early 19th century observers held with a high regard this idea that there was an advanced civilization widely populating the North American continent long before the American Indians ever did. As a matter of fact, in 1811, the governor of New York, DeWitt Clinton, told the New York Historical Society that this was a well-proven fact. And he even went on to explain that there are numerous remains of ancient fortifications that were found in this very country, America, demonstrating a population that far exceeded that of the Indians. But of course, this type of history tends to get covered up and lost in an age of cognitive dissonance.
It's important to note that the 19th century American Iroquois Indians were reported as having esoteric fraternities, or what we would call occult secret societies, among their tribes. This is yet another historical fact that was documented by Governor DeWitt Clinton. Researchers explained these esoteric Indian fraternities to be a form of ancient Freemasonry prevalent in the land. These claims were taken seriously when the Seneca leader, known as Red Jacket, as well as other New York area Indians, were seen wearing Freemasonic-style medals in the shape of the square and compass. This is a fact well documented in the 1903 New York State Museum monograph titled Metallic Ornaments of the New York Indians by archaeologist William M. Beauchamp.
So we see the Luciferian god of Freemasonry thriving in the land, being worshipped and served here long before the founding fathers had officiated the American government. It would seem that neither the early settlers nor the Indians had brought Lucifer worship to the land, but were rather continuing the occult traditions of the prior civilizations of this great western continent. Multiple civilizations, ancient and modern, living and acting under the same demonic principality, all on the same American soil. This idea is further vindicated as we look to the hidden history of the name America.
Tom Horn explains in his book Zenith 2016 that there is much encoded in the name America. Pointing to the works of famous theosophists and historians, he breaks down rich historic clues into America's secret destiny, hidden within the name. This title America is, according to some people, the title from which America is taken. It is related to Mesoamerican history, serpent worship, and giants. And according to Freemasonry, connects the founding of the United States and its capital designers with wisdom derived from the fallen flying seraph.
According to Manly P. Hall, Amaruka is linked directly with the plumed serpent god known as Amaru. This god was worshipped throughout the Americas under different names. He was the god Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, Gucamatz in Quiché, and in Peru he was called Amaru. From Amaru comes the word America. Amaruka is literally translated land of the plumed serpent. These ancient American cultures had priestly orders and ceremonies. And according to Hall, these ceremonials are of most importance to students of Masonic symbolism and mystical philosophy, since they in fact establish beyond doubt the existence of ancient and divinely instituted mystery schools on the American continent.
It bears irrefutable evidence as to why the most notable occultists of centuries past had declared America to be the fulfillment of this ancient esoteric prophecy, becoming the world democracy capital, and the manger, if you will, awaiting the coming dark Messiah who will wage war against the saints. This secret destiny was very much in the minds of many of the founders of the United States and can easily be seen throughout our brief history as a nation.
The foundation of America, just like the rest of the foundation of the rest of the Western world, is built around two kinds of building blocks. There is an occult, esoteric set of building blocks, going back to the Enlightenment era, going back to the age of the Renaissance, pulling from ancient mythology. But there's also another form of building block. It is a Christian ethic. There is a Christian Judeo ethic that's also a part of the Western world. And it's the tension between those two sets that we see coursing through America, coursing through all of the world, really. But America is really unique because it's a clash point. You can travel around this country and there's a multitude of Christian crosses everywhere. America's a land of Christian crosses. And then you go to your state capitals, you go to your national capital, you go to your large skyscrapers, and you've got deity statues, you've got monuments erected to pagan gods and goddesses. And so while Christian crosses dot America, representing that Christian ethos that's a part of the American culture, there's also this sense of an occult, esoteric foundation. And the symbols of your democracy, the symbols of your national flavoring is built around monuments and statues representing deities from the ancient world. There's a paradox in America.
Well, I think in the birth of America, they had, no question, Freemasons and others involved in the very beginning, and there were other secret societies besides them. So you have that intertwined in the birth of America anyway, and that was by design.
There was an occult history and destiny, even before 1776. The belief on the old world was that the United States could and would be a new Atlantis based upon the writings of Plato and also by the writings of Sir Francis Bacon. All of this information from the old world was inculcated in the design of Washington, D.C. There was an occult destiny and secret information that would influence the future of the United States.
One of the mystic prophets in the modern fulfillment of this destiny, and we've mentioned him before, was Manly P. Hall. Hall is considered to be the most influential Freemason of the 20th century. Hall was not just an entry-level Mason. He was actually a 33rd degree known as a Grand Sovereign Inspector General in the Luciferian craft.
Manly P. Hall believed that America had a secret destiny, that America is a special nation, that America was somehow set apart to lead the world forward with a new way of viewing not just itself, but viewing the world as a whole. Manly P. Hall had an incredible background in terms of esoteric understanding and occult philosophy. The work he did on Freemasonry, the work he did on occult philosophy, still today forms a very powerful foundation for the esoteric beliefs of various secret orders. Manly P. Hall had this incredible sense that America is a shining city, a city that all the world can look to. Now, he said it all throughout his writings. There's this illustrative model that America is this shining city, this beacon for the world.
Hall knew that the ancient writings all pointed forward to America becoming the philosophic empire that would be the pinnacle of the new order of the ages. By the time of Hall's life, it was already well known that the architecture in D.C. was predominantly reconstructed pagan temples of the old world, built to revive the power of the old gods, very similar to Vatican City in Rome. We're dealing with replicas of ancient ritual chambers and monuments erected on strategic street layouts that form magic symbols required for high-level sorcery.
Washington, D.C. was designed by L'Enfant, a Frenchman that was hired by George Washington. And he had some rather bizarre ways of looking at things. You know, if you were up on an airplane, of course there weren't any at that time, but you would see the crosses and the types of shapes that are really reminiscent of some ancient, rather occultic figures and histories, which doesn't surprise me. That has attracted Washington, that is, people that have that particular proclivity over the years, which is why they have a giant Wicca community, and then of course a lot of demonic activity. Why I refer to Washington as the most evil place in the world.
The architecture is by design in Washington, D.C. I mean, you've got individuals that were designing occult symbolism, and again, it's done in a very big and broad way. I mean, it's almost like you've got to be up in the sky to look down at it. You've got to understand the symbolism. That's all about hidden symbolism. You're talking even buildings that would be spiritually charged. They represent something. They, just like the temple in the Old Testament represents, things concerning God, concerning heaven. The Spirit of God guided the folks in Exodus to actually build those things to represent. So it's the alternative. It's the other side. It's them representing another reality. It's on the other side of the fence, spiritually speaking. It draws power. If they're spiritually guided for the architecture, then they're going to be drawing the powers. Ultimately, it involves the spirits that have guided them to take precedence territorially. We don't understand that a lot, but it's all about that unseen spiritual side that has guided them. That's the big issue.
To further investigate, we headed to Ground Zero to meet up with Tom Horn and discuss some of the secrets of popular American symbols and their connections to the ancient past.
44 signers at least of the U.S. Declaration of Independence were Freemasons. They were committed to an esoteric plan. You had Europeans that were influencing the early founding fathers here. Why? Because they had this deeply held occult idea that was based on Bacon's New Atlantis, right? That at one time, in fact, by the way, Bacon wrote that he thought the original Atlantis might have been right here, where Washington, D.C.'s capital city is now. Wow. And that this is where it would be rebuilt. This is where it would rise from the ashes, right? To become an occult democracy dedicated to all of the ancient pagan gods. Now, whenever we talk about this kind of stuff, I doubt that most of the people that are walking around us here in the Washington Mall have any clue the forethought that went in to the way this design is laid out, with the obelisk standing in our background. In the other direction, the U.S. Capitol Dome. What this symbolism all means had to do with their dream of building a new occult democracy that would once again give honor to the ancient pagan gods. And in fact, as you know, you can go on the official Library of Congress website and you can read an article called The Most Approved Plan. Right. In fact, all of the original paperwork is right over here in the Library of Congress, right? And what does it say? It says that they advertised to all these engineering firms around the world, France, America, right? For somebody to come up with a plan about how the capital city, which Jefferson named the capital city after Capitoline, the ancient Roman city over which Jupiter was the god that ruled all of the other gods. And so they advertised this engineering plan, and all these firms around the world turned in their submissions. They all wanted to get these lucrative Washington contracts, right, to build these buildings and edifices. Thomas Jefferson rejected all of the plans, and our own Library of Congress website tells us why. Because he specifically wanted to shepherd a plan in which this would be built based on the old Roman pantheon and dedicated to all pagan gods. That's what they want, and that's what they built, and that is the reason why, as you and I are standing here in the mall today, you have this obelisk. Now, it's the largest obelisk of its kind in the world, standing 6.666 inches high, 6.66 inches long, each measurement at the perimeter of the base. But it's really based on ancient Egyptian mythology, the original design of which, an obelisk facing a dome, the dome of Isis, the temple of Isis, right? It was a generator. It had alchemy involved with it. The purpose of it was to draw up from out of the underworld the seed of Osiris, so that Osiris could take his rightful place in the Pharaoh, and now Egypt has divine representation. Now this is based on the myth of Osiris, the dying and rising god, and his sister, wife, the queen of magical skills, Isis, right?
Right.
And so the way the story unfolds in antiquity is that the evil brother Set gets 72 conspirators. Now we know this number 72 is very important. We'll see it inside the US Capitol dome in the 72 pentagrams. They waited 72 years from the signing of the Declaration of Independence to dedicate this obelisk to George Washington, right? So this number turns up over and over. 72 cosmocrators, evil spirits, help Set kill Osiris. They capture him, they nail him up in a box, and then chops him into 14 pieces. This also plays out, by the way, in American history. Chops him into 14 pieces, throws those pieces into the Nile River. Isis searched the banks of the Nile River, but she's only ever able to find 13 of the 14 pieces of Osiris. The missing piece is his phallus, his male organ. So what does Isis do? She takes the 13 pieces of Osiris and she affixes them together in a more perfect union. In the United States of America, we take the 13 colonies and we bring them together to form a more perfect union. And right here in the capital city that represents that union, we also recreate the dome and the obelisk.
So ancient Egyptian religion is literally woven into the fabric of the foundation of America. There is absolutely no denying the connections and symbolism between the two. But it doesn't end with symbolism. This actually plays out in ritual. Right as Tom was getting to the breakdown of the ritual, on location, we were met with what was later determined to be high-level audio surveillance. Our wireless microphone frequencies were being tapped into, causing our transmission to suffer interference at times. What you are about to witness is the product of that interference.
Now, so important, by the way, was this story where Isis creates a magical obelisk to replace the missing part of Osiris's epithelic corpse, right? She sits on, to be blunt, the obelisk on the corpse of her dead husband brother, and Isis fashions the very first ever raising of Osiris enchantment ceremony, in which she calls forth the seed of her dead husband from up out of the underworld. It magically emits from the obelisk into her womb, and Isis becomes ever pregnant because she is constantly giving birth over and over again to the dying and rising god. Now, so important was that mythology, by the way, that it formed the center of the cosmology of all of ancient Egyptian magic, and then later into the mystery schools, Rosicrucianism, the Freemasons, right? So important was it that at the inauguration of every pharaoh who would take his role as the king of Egypt, during a festival called Opet, they would put the pharaoh on a barge and they would pull him up the Nile River. As he was on the Nile River, the laity of Egypt are walking along both sides of the river, right? And they're replaying the myth of Osiris and Isis. They take him to the largest religious complex ever built, the temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak, where he gets off the barge and he walks into the domed belly of Isis, the temple of Isis. And as he is standing in that domed building, looking out into the mall, into the courtyard where the obelisk is erect, and the masturbatory sun god Ra has rose up into the air so its heat can fall upon the obelisk to excite it, right? Inside the belly of Isis, the magicians of Egypt. And we know these guys had significant occult power, because when Moses goes down to face the Pharaoh to say, "Let my people go," they actually were able to recreate almost all of the miracles that God performed, as Moses is standing there with his shaft. So we know these guys had supernatural power. They recite the original raising of Osiris ceremony while the Pharaoh is standing inside of the dome. We don't know what exactly the language around that is, but we know it was preserved in the mystery schools. And across town from where we're standing right now at the Hera Dome, they claim that they continue to have this important language, the spells, the incantation for the raising of Osiris. Well, they would conduct that ceremony while the Pharaoh is standing there. The seed of Osiris would be drawn up from out of the underworld through the testes of the obelisk. It would magically emit into the ever-pregnant belly of Isis, and Pharaoh would become transmogrified. He entered into the building a man, he comes out of the building, he is a god. And all of Egypt celebrates because now they have divine representation. Now fast forward to this present day. The Freemasons openly admit that the obelisk, the dome, well, again, it's on the Library of Congress website. These are structures designed and dedicated to all of the ancient pagan gods. But how many Americans know that at the inauguration of every American president, while he is standing over here in the dome, the pregnant belly of Isis, looking out across the mall at the obelisk over here in the distance, that across town at the Hera Dome, the headquarters of the Scottish Rite Freemasonry 33rd degree, they are conducting the raising of Osiris ceremony in anticipation of the day that literally the spirit of Osiris, or who the Greeks would call Apollo, is going to rise up out of the underworld to become incarnate in a future American president who will take his rightful place according to the prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States, which both Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his Vice President Henry Wallace wrote about. Wallace wrote about it in his biography, that he convinced Roosevelt, I think he was trying to take credit, but that he convinced Roosevelt that the prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States, the Novus Ordo Seclorum, was a Masonic prophecy pointing to a day in the future when the United States would rise up to take its rightful place as the capital of the New World Order, the fulfillment of the Sibylline prophecy that says, what? That Apollo is going to rise up from out of the underworld, take his place in a man, and give birth to a new golden pagan age. Literally, the generator to make that happen is what we are standing in the middle of today doing this recording. And if you go inside the Capitol Dome and look up into the underside of the pregnant belly of Isis, what do you see? The apotheosis of George Washington. Literally, apotheosis means to become a god. And what god is George Washington becoming? Walt Whitman, the famous American poet that is so connected to American history, said he's becoming the Osiris.
Freemasonry and the founding of America, there is a very important link between the two. Freemasons held a very important part in America's foundation. George Washington was a Mason in good standing. A number of the signers of the Declaration, your Articles of Confederation, a number of them were well-known Masons. A number of the generals in George Washington's army were also well-known Masons. America's founding is steeped in Masonic lore and Masonic history. But it's not just America's founding. That flavoring has flowed through America generation after generation after generation to the point where this country, the United States, has a Masonic saturation in its history, in the fabric of its culture.
When the Freemasons designed this majestic pagan city of DC, they intended it to be their revived ritualistic chessboard, with all pieces in place for their scheduled conjurings, with the ultimate goal of awakening the spirit of Osiris, Apollyon, to one day inhabit their final world king. They have carried out this famed ritual with the inauguration of every U.S. president, firmly believing that the prophecies of America will in fact come to pass in the fullness of time.
So the founding of America was clearly the beginning of the ancient prophecies being fulfilled. The great blessed continent of the Western Hemisphere to become the philosophical democracy that would lead the world as a beacon of light into the new order of the ages. In order for this philosophical empire to bloom, there had to be two main prerequisites met: a safe haven that legislated and protected the freedom of all religious practices, and a zenith of the secret teachings of the old world. And that's where secret societies entered the stage.
Secret societies have existed among all people, savage and civilized, since the beginning of recorded history. It is beyond question that the secret societies of all ages have exercised a considerable degree of political influence.
Among some of the most influential of the Founding Fathers, we find secret societies which have remained in the shadows over the years, wielding their power and authority in American politics, culture, and religion. It's always been the goal of the secret orders to keep and maintain the ancient occult teachings and rituals while influencing the politics, religion, and culture of their day. Historically, the secret societies have seemed to always control the zeitgeist, or the spirit of the time.
Secret societies are groups of individuals who share commonalities, goals and visions of a united humanistic future of esoteric enlightenment. In other words, these groups are formed with a specific agenda of ecumenical unification of all faiths and creeds, with the common goal of global order. This once again projects the American doctrine, e pluribus unum, or out of many comes one, the land where all paths lead to God. We're told that we are one nation under God, but as we see, this is a nation of many faiths, and the God declared by the founders was clearly not the God of the Bible.
The God mentioned by the founders, and even referenced on our currency, is none other than the universal great architect entity, which high-level Freemasons reveal is actually Lucifer, the light bearer, the serpent god. This God accepts all faiths besides true biblical Christianity, and goes by many names across the cultures. This is another brick in the wall of understanding secret societies and how they are able to coexist as a large body, even having factions within.
The most notable secret societies that have influenced the occult New World system include the Freemasons, Traditional Rosicrucians, Hellfire Club, Skull and Bones, Ancient Mystical Order Rosicrucis, Ordo Templi Orientis, the Golden Dawn, and the Jesuits.
Seeing that America is the philosophical empire foretold by occultists of the ancient world, coupled with the fact that global decisions for order always have to be cleared via American politics and force, it is no surprise that politicians and corporate leaders from various secret societies, both foreign and domestic, all meet together for a blood sacrifice in a grove of biblical proportions every summer in California. Time would not allow for individual breakdown of every secret society in attendance. However, the common goals of these powerful groups are boldly plotted at this annual sacrificial gathering in the Redwood Forest. We're dealing with the United Nations of secret societies, if you will.
Bohemian Grove is where the walls come down between the societies, and the principalities emerge from the other side, as some of the most powerful world leaders devise the biggest moves and changes that will take place on the world scene.
Most people have heard about the Bohemian Grove, which is a yearly event that takes place in the redwoods of Northern California. What they don't know is that the Bohemian Grove is an adjunct to the Bohemian Club, which is in downtown San Francisco. Every year, they take this statue out of the Bohemian Club, a statue of St. John of Nepomuk from Czechoslovakia. Bohemia is in Czechoslovakia. They take this statue of St. John of Nepomuk, and every year they transport him from San Francisco to the Bohemian Grove up in Northern California.
St. John of Nepomuk is considered the patron saint of Bohemian Grove, and this particular statue of him that makes a pilgrimage every year depicts Nepomuk making the occult sign of silence, covering his mouth. Historically, Nepomuk suffered death for keeping the Queen's confessional secrets. This level of commitment is a standard in secret societies. Death before disclosure of secrets. Being a member or a guest even at the Grove entails taking an oath of silence, and this is clearly portrayed in the statue of their patron saint.
The Bohemian Grove was a creation of members of the Bohemian Club that had hundreds of acres in the redwood forest of northern California. And they would invite the greats and the near greats from across the world, all men, to these camps that were established there in the summer for several weeks. And they would meet together secretly, and they would brief one another about their government activities, the types of policies that were being worked from one government to another. We had former presidents that went there. It's interesting, I know Colin Powell's emails after having gone to the Bohemian Grove were released by WikiLeaks, and he talked about this thing that they did on abandoning care. What it was, they had this giant owl that would be set up in the woods, and everybody would come and they would cast all their cares on this owl as a ritual of sorts. Now, you can dismiss that as silliness. These are grown men, most of them in their 50s, 60s, and so forth, but very influential people. And they did these sorts of things that have been fairly widely reported. And yet, I would argue that the decisions often made there, or the discussions made there, the camaraderie that was developed, would ultimately find its way into policy or financial decisions by governments and industry, because you had Hollywood magnates and you had the likes of the Googles of the world, and then of course all the way up to presidents and other countries. A bizarre secret society of sorts.
Bohemian Grove was astounding when I first heard about it. I never heard about it at all during the 80s or the first part of the 90s. So we have somebody that was coming to our offices seeking help, coming out of really, really dark satanic rituals and abuse and so forth. And one day they asked me, "Have you heard of Bohemian Grove?" I said, "No." They sat down and they wanted sheets of paper, big sheets of paper. They began to draw cabins and occult symbols, trees. Then they drew this like little lake area and then a big owl, and they had people in hooded robes throwing a man into the fires that showed people sitting across. So they began to draw all these pictures. They actually handed me a necklace with an owl that they said they wore in the 60s when they were there. So as they explained it to me in the early 90s, it was a place where political, military, media, and wealthy elite people were brought. Massive sexual decadence, sexual ritual, sexual exploitation. Kids, girls, boys were used. Some of it for bribing. So Bohemian Grove came out later on with the Alex Jones video. As soon as I saw it, I went back to the paperwork, went back to the individual that first shared it with us. This is on the Russian River in California. It's been there for a long time. It's connected to Skull and Bones. It's connected to other darker oriented, we'd call it secret society. But Bohemian Grove is literally no different than a high place of the Old Testament. It is an encampment for an idol of an actual demonic presence. That's what every idol is a representation of the actual presence of a territorial or a particular demon god, small g, that would rule a tribe or a family or rule a nation even. And that would be the image. So we have the owl there. They do a number of preparatory rituals, which is true among left-hand pathers. That this whole ritual leading up to this, it's one of many that is done, but before they can ever do it, and they never do it without acquiring, inviting, somehow they bring in the world elite. So we all know the stories now, even from the Bohemian Grove Club in San Francisco, the names that have been put out, the lists that have been out, many, many other pictures are out now, old black and white pictures are out. It's been there a long time.
It's a place where you can come as Democrat or Republican. You can come as a financier. You can come as the CEO of major corporations and major companies. It's a place for networking. It's a place where you can come and, without the camera of the media on you, can discuss policy. And really what it boils down to is relationship building. Relationship building across all lines. It's that rubbing shoulders, it's that coming together. It's that place where they inspire one another and move agendas and ideas forward without the prying eyes of media, without the prying eyes of the public.
One of the most damning indictments of the realities of this Luciferian gathering, made up of all secret societies and political parties, celebrities and global leaders, would be the David Gergen Street interview. Gergen was the presidential advisor to Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and Clinton, and a longtime member of the Grove. This literally validates not only the existence of the Grove and the rituals, but also depicts the code of secrecy taken by its members.
I read a Washington Times article many years ago where you had a comment about the organization, and then now it's been in the Wall Street Journal, it's been in a lot of different newspapers, and that's the Bohemian Grove. And back in, 1996, when you joined as a Clinton advisor, the Republicans were criticizing you, oh, what about Bohemian Grove? And then you countered them by saying, hey, I don't run around in the woods naked. What did that mean? Here is the before-mentioned Washington Times article where he said, I didn't run around naked like they do.
I don't know what quote you're referring to. I'm not aware of any quote like that. Listen, I am a happy member of the Bohemian Grove. I like the folks who come there, and it's really inappropriate for me to talk about the group beyond that. Thank you.
Have you been there for the ceremony with the cremation of care?
Frankly, I don't think that's something I need to talk to you about.
Bohemia, we thank thee for thy adjuration.
Have you been there for the ceremony with the cremation of care?
Frankly, I don't think that's something I need to talk to you about.
Really?
That's right.
Well, I'm Alex Jones, and I snuck in there in 2000. I'm the guy that blew it wide open and got the video, and it's been on national TV.
Well, I disrespect you for that.
You do?
I do.
But it's a lot of big public officials going in there. Don't we deserve to know?
I don't know anything about you, and I don't know anything about your film. But if you go in there with an understanding, you violated that understanding by releasing that film, and I don't respect you for that.
Really? But we have public officials.
I'm sorry. You took an understanding when you went in there that you would not do that film, and did you have an understanding when you went in there?
No.
Did you crash it?
Yes.
Yeah, and it has no trespassing signs there too, doesn't it?
No, they put them up after.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I just walked in.
I'm sorry, sir. I've been there before. I know what the circumstances are, and I'm sorry you violated the understandings. That was not a gentlemanly thing to do.
But what about the ritual? Is the ritual genuinely?
Sir, everything I don't owe you this comment.
I know. I appreciate it.
This is what's called ambush journalism, and I disrespect you for that as well. So thank you
ever
and goodbye.
been in the ritual?
It's none of your damn business.
Oh.
That's right. Listen. You go around and make understandings with people and violate them. You ambush people on the streets, and that's inappropriate form of journalism. If you wish to practice that, that's fine, but don't ask others to respect you for it. If you want to, you can do. You're free American, like anything you want. If you want to be uncivil and rude and ungentlemanly, that's up to you. But don't expect the rest of us to say, "Oh well, you're
there, Mr. Gergen."
I'm sorry, nobody sets policy in there. We try to be gentlemen, and obviously, you don't belong there.
Weaving spiders come out here. The biggest issue is the ritual itself. People see the ritual, they hear the stuff. It's almost like a massive drama that's going on. It looks like a big dramatic thing when you hear the voice of the speaker, the person behind speaking about the cremation of care and be gone, and he screams all these things out. And then the audience of presidents and senators and the world's elite all begin to clap. First we have to ask, who has the clout to bring world leaders, presidents, kings of the earth, media moguls, military generals? Who has the power to bring those people together in one location? Why would anybody, any human being, even if it was just a fake, mock human sacrifice, who would go to that? So even if it was mock, even if it was fake, why would world leaders, powerful people, go there and applaud at the end if it was fake? Here's what I believe without question about Bohemian Grove. Some are there because they've been invited to be influenced. They're unwitting to what's going on. Many, if not most, are witting to what's going on. They know what's happening. When we found out the reasons for the ritual at Bohemian Grove, the human sacrifice that would go on, it's not Moloch, but it goes back to Sumer, more likely to Semiramis and the most ancient of the ancient gods, small g, and the ritual of a human to be offered. So that in a ritual, as I said earlier, when a ritual is done, it's done as inspired by that side to open a doorway, to cause a release, to grant the door, to open the door so they can come through. So the most important thing is not only who gets them to come, who designs this to be done, and what's the real reason? The real reason is similar to Revelation 16. When out of the mouth of the false prophet, the beast, the Antichrist, and the dragon, come spirits sent to the kings of the earth to supernaturally gather them, to move them. You have a massively global scale, powerful ritual being done so that when that human being is thrown, and probably alive, maybe drugged, but probably alive, thrown into the fires, burned alive, then the demons that have been right at the doorway, all of a sudden the doorway, the curtains come down, and that presence by target goes to the audience there. So in the real Luciferians, the reason they're doing this, summoning spirits, sending it on to the audience, world leaders, for influence, for inspiration, for preparation, to move them in one direction. It is an astounding ritual. How could it be happening on U.S. soil? It's a global class ritual. It's a powerful high place sitting on U.S. soil.
Bohemian Grove is a high holy place for the shadow government and has been since its infancy. The occultist movers and shakers of the world have long found demonically charged power and comfort in the blood rituals amidst this brotherhood of brotherhoods. What was once considered a conspiracy theory, this shadow government, has now broken out into the mainstream under a different name, possibly to soften the blow of its exposure. This long-standing cabal of decision makers and policy setters, the hand behind the false flag terror attacks and sponsor of international terrorist groups, the shadow government is now known as the Deep State.
There exists in the world today, and has existed for thousands of years, a body of enlightened humans united in what might be termed an order of the quest. It is composed of those whose intellectual and spiritual perceptions have revealed to them that civilization has a secret destiny. The outcome of this secret destiny is a world order ruled by a king with supernatural powers. This king was descended of a divine race, that is, he belonged to the order of the illumined. But those who come to a state of wisdom then belong to a family of heroes, perfected human beings.
The Deep State is the political means to advance the agenda of secret societies. It's the hand that rocks the cradle, per se. It's the arm that gets things done. Controlling the narrative, both politically and culturally, the Deep State is the puppet master, regardless of the perceived party dominance. It enacts policies, it funds terror, creates social uprising, and even tailors the mainstream media, all with the goal of advancing the nations towards the one world system. Literally speaking, they are constructing the beast system.
It's really a clandestine type of network of people that are undercutting government. It really dates back to Mustafa Ataturk, the Turkish leader of 1923, when he used clandestine operations within government to preserve his own government. And more recently, of course, in this country, starting really during the election of 2016 for Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, we began to see evidence of what we've seen overseas in Turkey and other countries, and that is specifically a shadow government. But ultimately, I really see three levels. The first level of the deeper state is the political class, those people that we send to Washington for the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House representatives. And then, of course, you have the people that work for the federal government, for the president and his administration, the bureaucracy. If you listen to the likes of Bernie Sanders, the independent that ran for president, if you listen to Ted Cruz, the senator from Texas, or you listen to former President Jimmy Carter, they call it an oligarchy. In other words, only a handful of people truly run the government. They truly run the political establishment in Washington. And they operate based upon who's the biggest donor to their particular interests. So they refer to it as an oligarchy, a government of a few. Now, when you look at the bureaucracy, the people that are working for these political people in the first level, the bureaucracy is representative of, in some cases, people that truly try to run things from behind the scenes.
Many people are finally waking up to the existence of the deep state after years of calling it a conspiracy theory. But what most people don't realize is that this deep state, this shadow American government, goes all the way back to the very first president, George Washington, and the Founding Fathers.
If you go back to the very beginning of our country, the founders, there were 55 of those that attended the Constitutional Convention. The windows were locked, by the way, at the time when they were writing our Declaration and then our Constitution. Why? They didn't want the average citizen to listen in on the proceedings. It's because they were the elite at the time. They were an oligarchy, people that were unelected, people that were wealthy, mostly lawyers, that were really going to put together a government that was going to give us some liberty from the British and so forth, but a government that ultimately was very similar to what we found and left behind in Great Britain. It was bicameral, in other words, a Senate that was really like the House of Lords. Initially, it wasn't going to be voted down by the people. House of Representatives was really like the House of Commons, and it was organized accordingly. As you go through the litany of things that they put together, it was truly an oligarchy, though it gave us some liberty. It wasn't until Andrew Jackson was president and he formed the political parties that ultimately put together our current system that we found that the people began to have a voice. And I think that's critical to understand and appreciate, that the deep state was beginning to recede and the people were having influence over the direction of government. So you have that level. Then you have the people that are behind the scenes, what I call the second layer. Second layer are the influencers, the deep-pocketed wealthy people, the George Soroses of the world that donate $12 billion to non-government organizations that indeed influence our political class and our federal bureaucracy. Clearly, you have lobbyists, and there are thousands of them in Washington. You have non-government organizations that are so-called think tanks that produce papers, and academia that produce papers that are used to influence politicians and the bureaucracies on the policies that they want. Are they really reflecting the will of the American people? In many cases, I'd argue no, they aren't. You have secret societies. Now, I know that a lot of people don't quite understand and appreciate these groups. The Bilderberger Group, of course, they're an influence of great proportions. They, in 1991, recruited Bill Clinton, a lonely governor from the obscure state of Arkansas, raised him up, gave him a lot of money, and gave him a message, and that message was about trade. It was NAFTA, and he sold NAFTA as his agenda, and of course he sold a lot of other bad ideas as well. The Bilderbergers also raised up Barack Obama, gave him money, gave him media attention, and eventually the nomination from virtually nowhere. And of course he ruled with a very progressive agenda, which is what most of these globalists, most of these progressives have in mind at the second level, second layer. And then, of course, you have foreign governments that are part of the second layer of the deeper state. The Saudis have spent hundreds of millions of dollars lobbying Washington for its own political purposes. There are many, many others that are involved in this political influence class that is involved with Washington.
Before we get into what empowers the deep state, or the final level, We have to understand that their agenda is globalism. Globalism is described clearly in Daniel chapter 7 and Revelation 13 as the world system of which the Antichrist will take the reins. We're dealing with the indisputable objective of the secret societies, which further explains why the deep state is run by these very secret societies. Their aim is to build a Luciferian world kingdom, and they use democracy to spread their ideology upon the world stage.
The World Federalist Association is the longest running pro-world government lobby group in the United States. It didn't start out under that name. Back in the 1940s and 1950s, it started out as the United World Federalists. Today it goes under a different name, Citizens for Global Solutions. But all throughout its history, the World Federalist Association and its international umbrella group, the World Federalist Movement, have been working towards the idea of a global government, a world government, a new world order. That is the language that comes through. Back in the year 2000, I attended the United Nations Millennium Forum. I went as an independent accredited expert. However, because I was a member of the World Federalist Association at that time, I'd attended a number of meetings, a number of their events, and had been given a membership by the organization. I quickly discovered when I was at the United Nations Millennium Forum that we were running the show, that the World Federalist Movement was running the United Nations event that I was attending. I was part of Subgroup 6. Subgroup 6 was about restructuring world order. And so for the course of the week, we had panels and workshops and lectures and sessions, planning sessions, on things like creating a global taxation regime, developing an international military and police force, setting up a global parliamentary assembly. This is a very big idea. Because what we were doing was we were discussing the framework, the skeletal framework for literally a form of world government. What is a world government? A world judicial system, a world where we develop international law, a world military and police presence, a world executive. George Bush Sr. called it a new world order. That language, he used that language all the time. In fact, he was really well known for that phraseology. A lot of people even thought he was the one that brought up the term, that he somehow invented it. No, he was using an old phrase. Ronald Reagan talked about a new world order. Jimmy Carter talked about a new world order. FDR talked about a new world order. Back in the 1940s, the birth of various World Federalist organizations, including the United World Federalists, even churches were talking about world order. There were church crusades on world order. The Baptists were having crusades on world order. The Methodists were. They were doing letter writing campaigns to America's politicians, saying, as you guys work through the idea of a United Nations, this is in the mid-1940s, the later part of World War II, you need to develop this as an authoritative, effective, empowered international authority. In fact, you can go back even earlier than that. You can go to World War I. Nicholas Murray Butler, the president of Columbia University, a man who could walk into the office of kings and prime ministers and presidents. He was Mr. International during World War I. He openly talked about a new world order. In fact, he described World War I as the destruction of the old order and a war for the new order. And what he described was the emergence of a world authority with an international judicial system, an international police presence, and world law. This really is the ultimate idea, the ultimate goal of the oneness of man, the oneness of the world. The phrase the New World Order doesn't end there. You can go beyond that, back all the way to 1873 with the founder of the Baha'i faith talking about the necessity of a new world order. And that new world order would have a world judicial system. It would even have a world city, a world headquarters. It would truly be one world. This big idea, this dream, has pulsed and beat within the heart of American elites for at least a number of generations. It goes back a long ways.
Globalism is about, to most people, it's about instant communication worldwide. It's about open markets around the world. open borders in many cases. But it's more nefarious than that. To me, it's about a religion of humanism, a religion that wants to reduce the Earth's population from the current 8 billion to 500 million, thanks to the likes of globalist Ted Turner. They believe that they're genetically predisposed to be the elite of the world and that they're going to run things. They trace themselves back to, of course, Friedrich Hegel, who was a 19th century German philosopher who believed in the Zeitgeist, the spirit of the time. And they believed in, over time, that man's going to become perfect eventually. And as a result, they're going to be in charge of this perfect world. And it's, of course, going to be a one world government run by them with far fewer of us than there are today. So the globalists are a pretty heinous group of people, and their ideology is typified by occultism, Luciferianism, and of course moral relativism. And so when I talk about the globalists, whoever they may be, the Kissingers, the David Rockefellers, the Hillarys, and so forth, I think psychopathic Luciferians, and that's their general ideology.
This is an idea that's been in circulation for a long time, and it goes into some pretty interesting areas. In 1951, the World Federalists met with Pope Pius XII, and in his speech to the World Federalists, talked to them in glowing terms that this was really a noble idea, that this was the direction that the world was going, that your program, gentlemen, is a necessary program. This is needed. The Pope's address in 1965 to the United Nations was also about the necessity of a world authority, and how what we really need is the world to come together through the United Nations to have a final world authority. The idea of a world authority is really intriguing. When I was at the United Nations Millennium Forum, one of the documents that was in circulation was Transformation of the World. It was put together by the head of the World Assembly of Turkic Peoples. He suggested a world king, a type of authority figure, somebody who could pull the nations together into one. We need some kind of world coordinator. Small doubt that the world does need a civilized coordinator in international relations and in settling global problems. More than that, this coordinator must be a stabilizing factor, actually, the last-ditch authority on the earth. He must win confidence of each man and each nation. People must be stark sure that this coordinator would solve any problem in a just and humane way, and one should be sure that in him he would find understanding and sympathy, that he would treat any nation as his own son, and that he is indeed the last resort. And the man should convince his terrestrial brothers therein by his practical deeds. ... Can the world community do without a coordinator? Definitely not.
This idea of uniting the world under one king, it's an ancient idea. The first to attempt this was Nimrod at Babel. They had a one-world religious system, government, language, and of course a king. This system was a foreshadowing of the coming Antichrist system and was even fueled by the entities of their esoteric religion. These are believed to be the very religious practices that comprise what we call today the Babylonian mystery schools, which are the religious beliefs and practices behind the various secret societies that drive the deep state. So it's really no surprise to see the same demonic entities that had fueled Nimrod's kingdom and motivated his actions alive and active today, fueling the deep state. The third level of the deep state is the unseen realm, or the spirit realm.
The third layer is what I call the unseen realm. This is the spiritual dimension. And of course, there are demonic players. There are spiritual activities that take place at the center of the universe, which I really believe happens to be in Washington, where the power is really focused. Where money and great power is exercised, inevitably there's going to be a spiritual war. Ephesians 6 being the example where powers and principalities are very much in play. And so The third layer, the unseen realm, is constantly influencing the second layer, the influencers, and the first layer, the political class and the bureaucracy.
In the deep state that I see right now, take one more step down, one more step down. In that next step down, you have the real operating deep state. There is no end to history without the supranatural side. There is no real alteration of the political world and a new world order and that kind of, there is no new world order unless it's supernaturally based. 2,600 years ago, God said that there's a fourth kingdom. That's the deepest deep state you can get to. God already gave insight to that system being built and coming. It's very defined in Revelation 13 also. It's political, it's military, it's economic, and very clearly it's technological. If we're that close, Revelation 13, the biblical Greek word is anabano, they will rise as if, I don't know, we're the 10 kings. And so we've been given great insight to an agenda. It's like God ripped open Hell's Kitchen, saw the blueprints, and said, hey, here's some of the sequence of satanic evolution.
So it's the unseen realm where the real plots are devised. The spirit realm is a supernatural place that exists outside of our 4 dimensions. This is the place where entities live, devils and demons. We're dealing with principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. This is the realm that the deep state conspirators are tapping into. Their ideology is steeped in occultism, and their power is attained through performing rituals. Rituals are the heart and soul of the cabals of the world. Rituals are the keys that open the doors to the spirit realm.
Magic is the science and art of causing change to occur in conformity with will.
The role of ritual is essential because what ritual does is ritual connects the individual to the ancient concepts of continuity, that man, nature, and God are ultimately all one. Ritual is that experience, that mystical experience of continuity. You are stepping outside of time. You are stepping outside of a linear mindset, and you are now entering into an era of where everything is cyclical, everything is interdependent, everything is intertwined. And you are now acting in that spirit realm, that sense of continuity, where nature, God, and man are declared to be one. And you are enacting that. You are engaged in a type of spiritual theater, is a form of spiritual contract. And you are now a participant, a direct participant in that system and cycle of continuity, where all are connected to the all.
Where do the rituals come from? Just like we have biblical revelation, what God has done through all the Old Testament, New Testament, we have God initiating all of that. How to contact Him, how to call on Him, how to worship Him. So in all real rituals, they're inspired by the other side. There is no ritual that just a human came up with. It's inspired by the spirits to give designation, to give it's like giving a phone number. This is how you call us. This circle, this language, these symbols, this sigil, this is what you do to summon us. And if you do what we do and we give you the keys or the phone number to our side, if you do everything correct and if you do everything right, we'll show up. So it begins with them. There's no ritual in any book that I've ever seen or read that wasn't inspired from the other side first. They are giving their contact number. And when that occurs and somebody gets that and they begin to do that, obviously, even a Ouija board is a spirit-given way of contact, a doorway. Biblical Greek, it's a topos, a doorway that gives a legal right. They will come through. They want that door.
The most powerful ancient rituals have been passed down and immaculately kept by the heads of secret orders from the ancient world. It is by these rituals that the gods of old are summoned and cross over, empowering their henchmen to carry out their plans on the world's playing field. The high-level Freemasons, in particular, have been involved in some of the most maniacal religious rites, gripping the very core of Washington, D.C., as they conjure the spirit of the final age. The House of the Temple, also known as the Herodome in Washington, D.C., is the holy of holies of the Masonic craft, and is also considered somewhat of a Masonic mecca to the Scottish Rite Masons around the world.
At the Herodome across town, when they are conducting the raising of Osiris ceremony, in the middle of that chapel room is an altar, and on that altar are all of the holy books of the great religions of the world. But above that is a binding utility. It's one of the most famous in all of antiquity. It's called the Magic Square of Apollo, or it's called the Magic 666 Square, because the panels in the stylized sunlight above the altar are exactly the same layout as a magic square, so it's a stylized Magic 666 Square. In antiquity, that was used to raise the spirit of Apollo from the underworld, which is central, of course, to the magic based on the great obelisk behind me, the dome behind me, and the Freemasonic and Rosicrucian ideas of the return of Apollo Osiris at the end of time to lead the New World Order. Now, to effectualize that, at the Herodome, they conduct the raising of Osiris ceremony, where the Bibles and the other books are bound beneath the Magic 666 Square. This square was famous in antiquity because when adding the numbers in any direct line, horizontally, vertically, the numbers always equaled 111. But when you added all of the numbers that are in the Magic 666 Square, they equaled 666. So interestingly, when the Freemasons built this giant obelisk to George Washington, they maintained those influential numbers in that the obelisk is 666 inches long along each of the lines at the base, but it is 555 feet high. And if you think of that as a magic square, the number 111 remains and extends down beneath the surface of the earth to reach the totality of the number 666. So all of the numbers important to a magic Apollonian square used for raising the spirit of Apollo are incorporated into the design of the Washington Monument. Now, what most Americans also don't know is right over here, beneath the ground, is a miniature obelisk made to look just like this one, except it's only 12 feet tall, 12 being the number of the perfect government that will be incorporated when the Novus Ordo Seclorum prophecy comes to its fruition and the man of sin becomes Apollo in flesh.
One of the reoccurring elements of occult rituals, both ancient and modern, is numerology. The basic principles hold that numbers have a great deal of magical and spiritual magnitude. Some numbers are more potent and carry more power than others, and strategic combinations of certain numbers can render specific magical effects. Additionally, numbers also tie into planetary significance within rituals.
In the magical Hebrew Kabbalah, each planet is associated with a number, intelligence, or spirit. The intelligence of the sun is Nakel, which equals 111, while the spirit of the sun is Soroth and equals 666. It makes sense, therefore, that Freemasons built the Washington Monument obelisk to form a magic square at its base, the exact values of the binding square of the sun god Apollo Osiris installed in the ceiling above where the Osiris ceremony is conducted, in the house of the temple. 111 is also the number of the Trinity, both dark and light. Now, when you compare the raising ceremony that's held at the Herodome beneath a magic 666 square to the Washington obelisk, there's some interesting facts. In fact, the same Bible that Dan Brown called the lost symbol is a Bible that was placed in a magic binding square inside the testes of the Washington obelisk of Osiris, the Washington Monument, the purpose of which is to restrain the Bible's influence, just as it is in the Herodome, while allowing the seed of Osiris to materialize.
In order for the powerful deceivers to bring about their demonic will through magic, They attempt to attack their eternal enemy, the God of the Bible. Not only are these men seeking to raise the spirit of Osiris and bring about the kingdom of the Antichrist, but they feel the need to bind the power of the living God in order to level the playing field of the last days. But unfortunately for them, there is no binding the Word of God or even remotely constraining the power of the Most High. This is a great example of them trying to manifest their will into reality via ancient magic rituals of numerology. One 20th century specimen who enacted similar rituals, dedicating his every breath to magic and numerology, is none other than Aleister Crowley.
Aleister Crowley is a Luciferian Moses, if you will, with the law of the darkest ancient magic and a proven occult track record of success. Aleister Crowley's magic and influence has been seen distinctly throughout secret societies and in the lives of celebrities, politicians, and presidents, as well as spawning various cultural movements. His themes and writings have been vastly present in popular music, television shows, and films. It's practically impossible to separate the Crowleyan ties from the spiritual shifts that we've seen in the course of the 20th and 21st centuries. His dark shadow continues to lurk over humanity as the occult prophecies persist through the end of this age.
Aleister Crowley was born in England in 1875. He was born as the only son of a very wealthy brewing family. He went to the finest prep schools and was able to enter King's College, Cambridge, where he studied at one of the most auspicious universities in the UK. While he was there at that university, he became interested in three things: poetry, mountaineering, and the occult, and studied everything he could. And he heard about an invisible college, something that the Rosicrucians used for their secret society, and he wanted to investigate and find out what this invisible college was. And it led him to join the Order of the Golden Dawn, which was a post-Masonic secret society. That means that it was beyond Masonry. So people who entered into it had already gone through all of the grades of Masonry. And he absorbed all the information from the Golden Dawn and went on to start his own religion called Thelema, which he based upon the receipt of the Book of the Law in Egypt in 1904, where he said he received this information from a being called Aiwass. During his life, Crowley wrote about the variety of different spirits that he contacted. Aiwass was one of them. Another one he termed the magician or the wizard. He also did the Alamantra working in New York in 1918, where he came in contact with a being that he drew that looks very similar to what is known today as the gray alien. Crowley thought of himself not just as an occult scholar, but really as a prophet. And he talked to himself as the prophet of the new aeon, this cosmological age that would change current understandings of the world. So he called himself this prophet of the new aeon, and he was the head, and he became the head of the German secret society, the Ordo Templi Orientis, in 1925. But why I think Crowley is really referenced as one of the most important figures in modern history is that he left a vast repository of writings. You could distill all of his teachings into one simple 11-word, 11-syllable axiom, which is, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." And that was an important clarion call for later decades in the world, particularly the 1960s, where people like Timothy Leary took that call and promoted licentiousness and drug use through American society and really world society, as many people would pick it up. And that was really his intent. He really wanted to bring on this new age of Horus, which he called the birth of the child, a birth of a new value system, a non-Christian value system. And if you look back on the 20th century history, you can see that that has been in effect upon human civilization.
Crowley, obviously, in his adamant rejection of Christ, it reminds me a little bit like Judas. You know, if your heart is walled up against God and walled against, you become very open for the other side, because that's what the other side is all about. Opposition. You know, Satan, the fallen cherub, is in opposition to God. So when there's a heart that's bent that way, and that heart is angry and so forth, you already got doors being opened. And then when they pursue, demonic presence, dark side presence will only guide people to pursue darker measures so that broader doors can be opened. They do love to possess people, but maybe more than that, they like to use people. 1 Timothy 4:1, where people become vessels, conduits, and the entities then the demons then can use them to write those doctrines of demons. Then that influence, look at Crowley's writings. His writings influenced far more millions than when he was alive. So he has charged writings, rituals in those writings, the Amalantra working, and the crossing over of the entity LAM, Lamb. This is huge. We're talking about major rituals, and it couldn't have been done without blood. Even his own son died in one of those rituals. They're predatory, they're observers, they're watching, they're looking, and they're always going to come masqueraded. They have the power. The biblical Greek word is meta schizmazotai. It's that verse we read where Satan's able to masquerade as an angel of light. We read the verse quick, but it's real. They have the power, the supra-human power, to alter their presentation without changing their nature. And it's all done and designed for the sake of deception. So in his case, this high-level entity, engages him, and that's part of the initiation for him, from their side initiating him. Of course, he's acquiring presence, power, gaining what he would consider as knowledge from that side, and of course, then he's inspired to write. And from there, he pursued deeper and darker. Sex rituals and sex magic was big on the agenda, as is all the darkest of stuff, and then human and blood sacrifice is involved in it also. Now, some say in the Amalantra working, when Lamb came through, this entity that looks like a big head with two big eyes, it obviously looks like the Greys that eventually came out, later on in the 40s here in the United States, where that presence began to come out and be shown. Step back from that, and the Amalantra working, the people that were at the ritual acknowledged that they know, they could feel and even see something come through the porthole that Crowley in the ritual was creating. They were doing a ritual that opened a doorway, but it was so big that they could see and then feel this entity come through. They always present, whether in ufology, rituals, spirit guides, ascended masters, great white brotherhood, that side's always morphing their presentation so that it's acceptable, excitable to the individuals. No different than Genesis 3. When the fallen cherub came there, he was like the shining one. He not only amazed with what he was speaking, but his presence would have been something to amaze Eve.
Two of the well-known 20th century figures that were heavily influenced by the magic of Aleister Crowley were L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons. L. Ron Hubbard was a famous fiction writer, and of course the founder of the popular cult known as the Church of Scientology, while Jack Parsons was arguably one of the most legendary rocket scientists of all time. Both men were highly involved in Crowleyan sex magic rituals.
Both Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard were disciples of Aleister Crowley, and they practiced his teaching called Telema as a philosophy that is defined by the maxim, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." It comes from Crowley's Book of the Law, which can be connected to the spirit cooking ceremonies of the Podesta brothers and Abramovic from the WikiLeaks scandal. But these are entities that are channeled by an incorporeal demon intelligence named Awas. Telema is a narcissistic ideology that undergirds several esoteric magic societies like the AA and the Ordo Templo Orientis that fundamentally oppose God's moral law. So Satan targets sexuality because procreation is the human capability that comes closest to the divine, and as a result, it's not surprising that sexual perversion and sex magic are essential components of occult rituals. Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard's Babylon working entailed all sorts of aberrant sexual activity. Now, in Telemic literature, Babylon has three conceptual aspects. Number one is the gateway to the city of the pyramids. Number two is the Scarlet Woman. And number three, the Great Mother. She serves as a portal for sorcerers.
One of the paramount rituals conducted in the 20th century was by two individuals, Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard. And it became known as the Babylon working.
Babylon working, it was a conjuring of what they thought was called the Whore of Babylon, referred to in Revelation. So they thought the entity was real. Jack Parsons, rocket scientist, performed more than once the Babylon working, which was to bring a demonic high-level power presence into the actual sexual act so that the spirit could be then placed inside the physical side. And at the moment of conception, their view was that spiritual presence would augment. So the moment of conception, there's like an explosion. All of a sudden, the human spirit is there, and that's when life begins. Well, they want to inject that presence, conjure that presence. The goal was to bring about a hybrid being.
The idea of conjuring the Whore of Babylon in this ritual was quite fitting to have taken place in America. The occult world has long desired to revive the spirit of Babylon. The resurrection of the ancient one-world system once failed, but esoterically believed to prevail at the end of this age. These occult prophecies built the framework and ideals for America to become the world's superpower and philosophic empire, the very land foreseen as the final Babylon, and revered as such, not only in the world of mysticism, but also prophetically laid out in the Bible. So on the very land of the revived Babylon, they performed the Babylon working ritual, and the conjuring began.
The Babylon working sex magic rituals that was carried out by L. Ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons, the founder of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, happened through the mid-40s into 1946, and the whole purpose of it was to give birth to a magical being, a moon child, described in Crowley's works. And so they used the powerful energy of ninth-degree sex magic, rites that were intended to open a doorway through which the goddess Babylon herself, the archetype divine feminine, might be born, might come into the earth, might appear in human form. Now, Jack Parsons believed that he and L. Ron Hubbard actually accomplished this task of bringing the Whore of Babylon into materialization through a series of rituals that culminated in 1946. Jack Parsons' own biography actually preserves a celebratory statement in which he says that she was embodied in the womb of a female child. And in a fragment from his writings, Parson, who says he's exhausted but also exultant, he declares the work a success and believed that Babylon, in the manner of a dark, immaculate conception, was due to be born to a woman somewhere on earth within 9 months' time. He actually wrote, "Babylon is incarnate upon the earth today, awaiting the proper hour for her manifestation." Now, if one could believe these writings, you would expect that a female child was to be born around 1947, and indeed such an influential feminist was delivered that year, who could offer the most promise for identifying the fruit of Parsons' infamous ritual, and that would be none other than Hillary Rodham Clinton. Intriguingly, Parsons later referred again to the Babylon Scarlet Woman, and this time by a particular name, in his Book of the Antichrist on October 31, 1948, a full 69 years ago, when the female child would have been around 1 year of age. Parsons wrote that the spirit of Babylon came to him, but this time identifying itself as Hilarion, who, he said, would grow on to become an international public figure, dedicating to bringing the work of the Antichrist to fruition. Why is that important? Because the etymology of Hilarion is the arcane Hillary. Now, you have to ask yourself, how many internationally influential feminists were born in 1947 who are named Hillary and that have the potential to become the leader or vice president or influence the election of the President of the United States, the most powerful nation on earth that was dedicated from its inception to the enthronement of Osiris Apollo, who the Bible itself recognizes as Antichrist, and also ask how possible it would be that an entity calling itself Hillary made clear to Jack Parsons 69 years ago that it was dedicated to helping the rise of the man of sin.
According to Bill Clinton in a number of books, Hillary Clinton has been involved with Wicca, gone to so-called Wicca meetings or, quote, churches in Los Angeles. And she would decorate the White House Christmas tree, according to Gary Aldridge, with occultic-like figurines. That's rather bizarre, I would think. She was involved in communicating with the dead, much like Eleanor Roosevelt did.
All these questions came to my mind recently when reading the WikiLeaks email revelations and remembering how Hillary had hinted that alien disclosure would come if she was elected president, and how the people around her, Abramovich, the Podestas, others close to Hillary, affiliates of hers, were manifest believers in the same UFOs and what they call contiguous aliens, the same that Parsons and Hubbard sought through the Church of Scientology, and so on, that's actually based on an alien called Xenu, as well as being practitioners of the same Crowley occultism that Parsons and Hubbard were devotees of. When you consider all this, it seems to be immediately beyond probability of coincidence that in the days leading up to the last presidential election, these modern Telemas actually believed that Hillary is, or that she could be, the incarnation of the archetype divine feminine, the whore of Babylon, the Hilarion that is set to take the throne of the most powerful nation on earth to assist the Antichrist in his bid to rule the entire world.
This constant theme of the whore of Babylon, or the worship of the Babylonian goddess, saturates the American system, from the steeples of government buildings and cathedrals all the way to the Statue of Liberty off the coast of New York. It has always been a mainstay of the American system. Whether we're dealing with Lady Liberty, Athena, Isis, or even Gaia, we are constantly being inundated with this ancient occult theme of goddess worship across our land. But how would the cabal strategically embed this idea of goddess worship into the culture of the everyday American citizen? How could they condition a society into following after such a perversion on a massive scale?
America's introduction to accepting a pagan worldview in a serious way began April 22nd, 1970. It happened in high schools, it happened in colleges, thousands of high schools and colleges. April 22nd, 1970 was America's first National Environmental Teach-In, America's first Earth Day. When America's first Earth Day was introduced, the National Teach-In, Friends of the Earth put together a handbook called the Environmental Handbook, really simple. And in the Environmental Handbook, the very first set of essays and articles introduces the reader to a Smokey the Bear Sutra, where Smokey the Bear comes to America's youth as a mystical being coming to crush the butts of the capitalists, to crush out the cigarette butts, of course that's the imagery of Smokey the Bear, crush out the butts of those who see exceptionalism, that see differences, that see uniqueness, that see separation. Now, it doesn't quite say exactly that, but that's what you can read between the lines. Later on in the Environmental Handbook, Lynn White Jr. has an essay. It's a very famous essay. In fact, this essay really set the tone for the environmental movement. The essay demonstrated that Christianity is to blame. The world's ecological crisis rests on Christian shoulders. And until we move away from a Christian worldview, until we move away from a Christian ethos, we will continue to have a worsening ecologic crisis. What's interesting is Lynn White Jr. said what we need is a new religion. We need a new way of looking at the world through a different lens. No longer Christianity, but some other religious construct. Towards the back end of the Environmental Handbook, you have a list of acceptable religions, acceptable religious practices. Buddhism, shamanism, earth-friendly religions. Christianity, right out. No longer necessary. Christianity is the problem. The solution is opening ourselves up to new forms of spirituality, an earth-friendly, earth-centric, earth-loyalty-based spirituality. And that flavoring of the very first Earth Day comes through all the way to now. America was introduced to Gaia, to the Mother Earth, to the ancient idea that the Earth is alive as a spiritual entity on April the 22nd, 1970. When we consider Gaia and Gaia worship, the idea of a great mother, we can go all the way back through ancient times and see elements of her scattered throughout different cultures. Ishtar, Isis, Diana, Athena. What's interesting is the great mother, the great goddess, Gaia, to use that language, becomes almost an umbrella mother that absorbs all into her, because it's all built around continuity and oneness.
It's even more damning to consider that the city chosen as the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C., literally stands for the District of Columbia. The nation's capital was named for the New World's goddess of liberty, and was from her 1776 infancy a reincarnated Isis, containing all the necessary attributes of the ancient infernal goddess. Her worship and reverence has spread far beyond pagans and covens and cabals, reaching into public schools, universities, and mainstream beliefs. Out of this occult District of Columbia, the spirit of the goddess seethes continuously.
As we consider the various elements of occult rites, we can't overlook the power of blood. One of the highest forms of magic involves the sacrificing of human life, the spilling of blood. Blood sacrifice has been held to the highest regard for thousands of years, and it is believed to quickly engage the other side.
We interface with this body through the blood. The life is in the blood. So we're connected. We're not just up in the pineal gland. Our whole human spirit is housed, and we're plugged in through the blood. There's physics to this. So when you have a blood sacrifice and chemicals are being released in that blood sacrifice, everything's heightened. That's why they want to raise the energies. They want pain and fear and terror. They want all of us to be raised because it helps broaden the door so the spirit can come in and interface, grab into the end of rituals when the issue of death comes, and that's how they're designed. When death eventually comes, then that gives the complete doorway for the spirits to come over, then they're on this side.
Moving forward on the ritualistic timeline of America, we find a massive blood sacrifice, plotted and carried out by the deep state globalist cabal, invoking the magic, once again, of Aleister Crowley. Most Americans probably have no inclination that the events of September 11th, 2001 were a web of magic blood rituals, finely crafted and strategically woven with the goal of bringing about the new aeon.
The events of 9/11/2001 were suffused with occult significance. The numbers that were inculcated into the event all had ties back to the occult in general and Aleister Crowley specifically. The numbers of the planes were 11, 93, 77, and 175. In Aleister Crowley's doctrines, 11 was the number of the new aeon, but also the number of magic, as it fused in both the pentagram and the hexagram. So the first plane that hit the two twin towers, which also were an ideogram in the skyline of an 11, was plane 11. The second plane that hit the twin towers was 175, which is a ritual within Crowley's system about the God you adore. The number 77 was very important to Crowley. As we talked about earlier, it was the number of Babylon and the beast conjoined. So 77 plus 77. So 77 was important. It was also the number of Crowley's doctrine, Do What Thou Wilt on steroids, which is Liber Oz, his book 77, which dictates you can do what you want, and if anybody gets in your way, you're allowed to kill them. So that was 77. And then 93 were two numbers that are specific to Aleister Crowley. They represent two doctrines that are within his religion of Thelema, doctrines of agape and Thelema, both of which in the Kabbalah, in the specific subset of the Kabbalah, Gematria, if you add up the numbers of the letters, both add up to 93. So you can see those numerical signs in the events. The very The events of 9/11, which were pregnant with meaning and created great change in the world, which would be consistent with Crowley's definition of magic, which is to create change in the world in conformance with your will. These two monolithic buildings, the Twin Towers, were both 110 stories tall. And they also set against the skyline a huge 11, which to Crowley wasn't just a number, but also an ideogram, meaning these two different things had something. It was the symbolizing of the union of opposites, which is a very important doctrine within the occult, where two opposites come together and create something new. So those two twin towers were also referenced back to the two pillars that were in the original temple at Jerusalem, Boaz and Jachin. These two pillars that actually had occult significance. They both related to two different things, but they're also related to the pillars of Hercules, which means that that event in an occult context, the September 11th event, 2001, was a doorway to a new world, a new aeon, if you will. And that whole event can be correlated to a Wicker Man type of event where people were put in, not to their knowledge, but as a human sacrifice, turned to ash in the creation of a future world of chaos and war, just like it was said in Crowley's Book of the Law.
Interestingly, back in 2005, while the wounds of 9/11 were still fresh, George W. Bush made reference to this new order of the ages declared by our nation's founders. And he specifically stated that they were acting on an ancient hope that was meant to be fulfilled. If nothing else, this was a reference to the occult prophecies of this revived Babylon, this destined continent of occult enlightenment. But could the 9/11 ritual of the new aeon have any connection to all of this beginning to be fulfilled? Some researchers wholeheartedly believe that Bush's comments were a public declaration that the rituals of 9/11 had indeed begun this new order of the ages, or in the Crowleyan style language, the new aeon.
We have confidence because freedom is the permanent hope of mankind, the hunger in dark places, the longing of the soul. When our founders declared a new order of the ages, when soldiers died in wave upon wave for a union based on liberty, when citizens marched in peaceful outrage under the banner Freedom Now, they were acting on an ancient hope that is meant to be fulfilled. History has an ebb and flow of justice, but history also has a visible direction set by liberty and the author of liberty. When the Declaration of Independence was first read in public and the Liberty Bell was sounded in celebration, a witness said it rang as if it meant something. In our time, it means something still. America in this young century proclaims liberty throughout all the world and to all the inhabitants thereof. Renewed in our strength, tested but not weary, we are ready for the greatest achievements in the history of freedom.
Continuing on the trail of occult rituals of our great nation, we find a bizarre series of events, including pedophilia and a strange archaic practice known as spirit cooking. These events have made the headlines through the Clinton-Podesta email leaks. Once again, we find high levels of government-sponsored occultists exercising Crowleyan magic, leaving their marks on society with things that are so profane, we couldn't believe it had we not had substantial red-handed proof.
As soon as spirit cooking entered into the public eye, photos were leaked showing a wide range of high-profile guests involved in these cannibalistic dinner parties. Marina Abramovic has made many rounds with celebrities and politicians as a type of spiritual guru or witch who is said to have some type of radiant energy she can impart by gazing into one's soul. It's not shocking that she has ties to Hillary Clinton, who some claim is a practicing witch and necromancer, and possible channel for Hilarion.
John Podesta, of course, his brother went to some rather bizarre spiritual types of activities that were very occultic, certainly demonic, I would argue, where blood and semen and breast milk and so forth were involved by this so-called performance artists, and this was well publicized in the last couple of years. Even in their own homes, the art reportedly is of a very unsavory flavor for the average person to behold. You have these types of activities that profile someone that is rather frightening and evil, I would argue, as a lot of globalists would seem to fit that description.
Also in the WikiLeaks email, there were images of John Podesta flashing hand symbols with the number 14, the number of pieces that Set chopped Osiris into, and a fish on his other hand, which is the animal that ate the phallic 14th piece of Osiris, his corpse, his male organ. These are symbols that occultists directly connect to necromantic rituals that occultists like Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard, Freemasons, and evidently Hillary staffers employ during sex magic ceremonies for one purpose: to raise or to summon Osiris, Apollo, the spirit that the Bible says will be incarnate within the Antichrist.
Whether it's seances in the White House from Lincoln to Reagan, maniacal rites of the elite, or even ritual-based observances sold to the public, America is truly fulfilling the ancient prophecies, leaving no stone unturned. But the great ritual of the ages that is yet to come is not only the pinnacle of high-level Freemasonry, but it is the capstone event, tying together the prophecies of the end of the age from all the major religions and belief systems. It is the ritual that would ignite the resurrection of the Antichrist. The raising of the Osiris will be the greatest harnessing of Luciferic energy the world has ever seen. And when Osiris rises, the end is near.
When the Mason learns that the key to the warrior on the block is the proper application of the dynamo of living power, he has learned the mystery of his craft. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands, and before he may step onward and upward, he must prove his ability to properly apply energy.
Applying the seething energies of Lucifer is indeed what they had in mind as they built the city of DC as a massive Masonic ritual site, illuminated in the seasonal light of the Isis-Osiris star Sirius, and filled with demonically charged architecture, idols, and magic street layouts, ultimately setting the table for the coming main event ritual, the raising of the final Osiris to rule the unified world kingdom. The goal of a unified world kingdom isn't anything new. And as a matter of fact, Bible prophecy foretold a specific order of kingdoms that would come leading up to the final kingdom of Antichrist. And as Solomon said, there is nothing new under the sun.
You have to go back to Daniel's prophecy of the four kingdoms. There was Babylon, the Medes and Persians, Greece, and Rome. 4 world kingdoms prophesied. All of these played out exactly as it was foretold and was being fulfilled as Rome, the 4th kingdom on the list, was dominating the world while John was on Patmos. The Lord gave him the word to connect and pick up where Daniel left off. In Revelation 17:10 it says, "There are 7 kings, 5 are fallen and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short space." Each of the 7 kings have a kingdom associated with them.
Daniel gives us 4 kingdoms. The 2 prior world kingdoms that took place before the time of his prophecy were Egypt and Assyria, which makes Rome the 6th kingdom of the 7 mentioned in Revelation 17. This kingdom was currently in power when the revelation was given to John. Rome was a political, religious superpower of that day. Rome had the spirit of Antichrist, which is also known as the spirit of Babylon. You see, they were persecuting the people of God and leading the culture into spiritual fornication through idolatry. Peter confirms this idea in his epistles when he writes them from the church at Babylon, while actually being in Rome. This was a replay of the past Babylonian system while foreshadowing the final system to come, all maintaining that great horse spirit of Babylon.
Now the king that is yet to come is the one that will rule the prophesied seventh and final kingdom. This king will die by the sword according to Revelation 13. Simply put, this king will be assassinated and his death will be mourned worldwide. We're talking about a world political leader who has amassed unprecedented works in globalization and peace. One who has labored in bringing about change and breaking down the walls of political and religious division. So yes, when he is assassinated, the world will mourn his death. But then, in a miraculous resurrection back to life, he will be reanimated by the entity that ascends out of the bottomless pit. Revelation 17:8 explains this as the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. So he was alive, then dead, then alive again. It's through this supernatural resurrection, when the entity from the bottomless pit possesses this seventh king's dead body, that he becomes the eighth and final king, known as the Antichrist. This kingdom of the Antichrist is being built and revived today, with the majority of its policies in force being legislated and framed in our very own Washington, D.C.
How many people know that a tomb for the resurrection of Antichrist has already been prepared for his raising, and it lies beneath the U.S. Capitol dome? The United States Capitol crypt, it's a large circular room filled with 40 neoclassical Doric columns directly beneath the United States Capitol rotunda. As all mystic rabbis and Freemasons understand, the number 40 has great significance throughout the Torah, the Talmud, the mystery schools, because the number 40 represents transition or change, the concept of renewal, a new beginning. Rabbis say the number 40 has the power to lift the world into a new spiritual state. So consider how Noah's flood represented the end of one age and the birth of a new one, and it lasted for 40 days. Moses was on Mount Sinai for 40 days and came down with the stone tablets that set the rules for a new order. But according to Mackey's authoritative encyclopedia Freemasonry, 40 is the number of days of mourning in Assyria, Phoenicia, and Egypt to commemorate the death and the burial of their sun god, as well as the period in the festivals of the resurrection of Osiris. So consider that the U.S. Capitol crypt was built originally to offer a secret entrance to a coffer that they call Washington's tomb, that's stationed next to a repository of 13 statues of the National Statuary Hall collection. Of course, the number 13 is not coincidental. It's sacred to Freemasons as the number of Osiris and his future resurrection. Revelation 13:3 describes the head of the beast being wounded unto death. Then the whole world marvels when the beast is healed and rises from the dead. In this mockery of the death and resurrection of Christ, I suggest that the most fitting place on earth for the Antichrist body to lie in state will be in the tomb of Washington beneath the floor of the Capitol dome. Why? Because the rotunda of the dome is where deceased presidents, celebrated commanding officers, even celebrated private citizens, like recently the Reverend Billy Graham, lay in state beneath the magic 72 pentagrams and the apotheosis of George Washington, America's first Osiris, to be translated into the kingdom of Osiris. But until now, nobody has laid directly beneath the rotunda in the Capitol crypt that was, according to authoritative Freemasons, prepared for America's Osiris. There is therefore no other more appropriate place for a United States president or a celebrated global leader to be placed for viewing. It was prepared and has been in waiting specifically for the magic ceremony that will give rise to the beast of Revelation. On his death, Antichrist will be placed in this magic coffer designed by Freemasons, and the 33rd degree Scottish Rite members will come there to perform the raising ceremony. Through Masonic alchemy, presidential apotheosis, that is, the leader of the United States, America's Pharaoh, being transformed into a god within the Capitol dome or the womb of Isis in sight of the obelisk of Osiris, or the Washington Monument to those who Masons call profane, the uninitiated, actually began with America's first and most revered president, Master Freemason George Washington. In fact, Masons in attendance at Washington's funeral in 1799 cast sprigs of acacia or evergreen to symbolize both Osiris's resurrection and Washington's imminent resurrection in the realm where Osiris presides. Now, according to this Masonic enchantment, Osiris, Horus, was rising within a new president in D.C. as Washington took his role as Osiris of the underworld. Now, that's further assimilated and symbolized by the three-story design of the Capitol building. Freemasons point out how the Great Pyramid of Giza was made up of three main chambers to facilitate Pharaoh's transference to Osiris, just as the Temple of Solomon was a three-sectioned tabernacle made up of the ground floor, the middle chamber, and the Holy of Holies. The U.S. Capitol building is therefore designed with three stories: Washington's tomb, the crypt, and the rotunda, capped by a dome. Each floor has significant esoteric meaning regarding apotheosis, and the so-called tomb of Washington is empty, has been since construction. So we have to ask ourselves, why didn't they just clear this area out and use it if Washington was its intended corpse but refused to use the facility? The official narrative is that a legal issue kept the government from placing Washington's body there. However, just as the tomb of Jesus Christ was emptied before his ascension, Washington is not in his tomb because he was never meant to be. He was the forerunner, the John the Baptist sent to prepare the way for a Messiah, while he himself traveled to the home of Osiris, as depicted high overhead in the dome, in the womb of Isis, in the apotheosis of George Washington.
When you visit Washington, D.C., and you tour the Capitol building, the religion and the beliefs of the founders and proliferators of this great nation are clearly depicted in the apotheosis of George Washington. As you look up into the underbelly of the Capitol dome, seeing the heaven that George Washington is entering into, there are absolutely no Christian symbols depicted whatsoever. Jesus isn't there, Michael isn't there, there are no scriptures there, but rather you see Washington surrounded by demonic gods and goddesses of the ancient world, including Vulcan, of course, who Manly P. Hall says is the god that fills the Freemasons' hands with the seething powers of Lucifer. This is the heaven that George Washington is rising up into, inside the dome of the U.S. Capitol building. This is the heaven that the prominent founders believed in.
Interestingly, the term apotheosis of George Washington literally means the deification or glorification of George Washington. He has been deified into the heavens of the old gods, the gods worshipped by our nation's founders and forerunners, the very gods indeed of the ancients who prophesied of this Western continent being the future philosophic empire of the world.
In the context of the Capitol dome and the 72 stars that circle Washington's apotheosis in the womb of Isis, the significance of that symbolism is very, very important, because in sacred literature, including the Bible, stars are symbolic of angels. And within Masonic Gnosticism, 72 is the number of the fallen angels, or cosmocrators, reflected in the 72 conspirators that controlled Osiris's life in Egyptian myth. These are the same entities that currently administer the affairs of Earth, according to experts in the study of the divine council, that believe that, beginning at the Tower of Babel, the world and its inhabitants were disinherited by the sovereign God of Israel and placed under the authority of 72 angels, which became corrupt and disloyal to God. But these beings quickly became worshipped on earth as gods following Babel, and they were led by Osiris, Apollo. So, consistent within the traditions, the designers of the Capitol Dome, the Great Seal of the United States, and the obelisk Washington Monument circled the apotheosis of Washington with 72 pentagrams, dedicated the obelisk 72 years after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and placed 72 stones on the Great Seal's uncapped pyramid, above which the Eye of Horus, Osiris, Apollo stares. Those three sets of 72, combined with the imagery and occult numerology of the Osiris obelisk, the Isis dome, and the oracular Great Seal, are richly symbolic of the influence of Satan and his angels over the world, with a prophecy toward Satan's final earthly empire, the coming Novus Ordo Seclorum, or the new golden pagan age. Now, in order for the inevitable worship of Osiris to be reestablished on earth, the 72 demons that govern the nations have to be controlled, and therefore they're set in magical constraints on the Great Seal, the Washington obelisk, and the pentagram circles around the apotheosis of Washington, in order to bind and force the desired effect according to the esoteric beliefs of the Freemasons and other occultists. In The Secret Destiny of America, Manly P. Hall noted as well that the 72 stones of the pyramid on the Great Seal correspond to the 72 arrangements of the Tetragrammaton, or the four-lettered name of God in Hebrew. Those four letters can be combined in 72 combinations that result in what is called the Shimhamphorish, which represents in turn the laws, the powers, the energies of nature, according to the Masonic occultists. So the idea that the mystical name of God could be invoked to bind or loose these supernatural agents, or the powers and energies of nature, as Hall called them, is very meaningful creed inside many occult tenets, including Kabbalah and Freemasonry. And that is why the 72 stars are pentagram-shaped around the deified Freemason George Washington. Medieval books of magic, or grimoires, such as the Key of Solomon and the Lesser Key of Solomon, not only identify the star systems Orion, which is Osiris, and Pleiades, which is Apollo, as the home of these powers, but apply great importance to the pentagram shape of the stars for binding and loosing their influence.
So the city of DC has been intentionally designed for occult rituals from the ground up, and it was strategically built with elements already in place for the resurrection ritual of the coming Osiris, the final world pharaoh. The unused crypt of George Washington, demonically charged with symbols and magic, seems to be waiting for the dead body of the Antichrist to be placed, while the entity from the bottomless pit will be conjured up by the Freemasons to take possession of this king, right in the midst of the U.S. Capitol Dome, the womb of Isis. The table has been set for some time now, awaiting the final fulfillment of the ancient esoteric prophecies, as well as the biblical prophecies of the coming philosophic empire and its supernatural world king. It isn't by chance that the United States is heralding world peace and globalization, posing as the world's superpower, forcing the spreading of democracy, the very political vision of the ancient mystic philosophers. There truly isn't a more fitting location or nation for this empire to be, and for the world king to rise from. So could it be that Washington, D.C. is the great whore of Babylon who sits on many waters? Revelation 17 says the whore is a city, and the many waters that she sits on are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So I challenge you to show me one nation on earth that is made up of such multitudes of people, nations, and tongues, more so than the United States of America. This is the personification of the American creed, E pluribus unum, one out of many. We are one nation formed out of the vast and culturally diverse nations and tongues of the earth. Coupled together with the history, the rituals, and esoteric revival that has taken place on our soil, there is literally no place more fitting to be the fulfillment of the Whore of Babylon.
The Whore of Babylon, that end-time city, also sits upon 7 mountains or 7 hills, according to Revelation 17. Most scholars point to Rome when considering the city on 7 hills, but perhaps they're looking at the wrong Rome. Washington, D.C. was not only built on the pre-American land known as Rome, Maryland, but was also built on 7 hills. A new Rome, a revived Roman Empire, fueled by the spirit of Babylon, that would influence and lead the world in the last days' worship of the beast, of the seventh and final kingdom, to rule them all.
The ancient pagan prophets and philosophers foretold of this great Western continent that would lead the world in a last days philosophic empire, where the mystery occult religions would resurface into the mainstream.
The secret societies have preserved and practiced these ancient esoteric beliefs.
The deep state executes the agenda on the world stage.
The rituals invoke the entities, bringing about an atmospheric change.
All of this preparing the way for the great conjuring, the resurrection of Osiris, Apollyon, the final world king, the Antichrist. And this Luciferian secret destiny is undoubtedly being fulfilled right here in America, in the belly of the beast. We're living in a day and age where many are becoming cold and selfish. The world system is one that is self-centered and promotes an inflated view of man and a deflated view of God, or even denying God altogether and replacing him with false gods, mysticism, and humanism. We can't deny the fact that Bible prophecy is being fulfilled on a global scale as we compare the world events to Scripture. And according to the Bible, the end times started roughly 2,000 years ago and have been heating up ever since. People naturally have many questions, but by majority, they've been seeking answers in all the wrong places. You see, there is only one way for sinful man to be reconciled with the holy and righteous Creator, and according to the words of Jesus himself, it is only through the Son of God and his sacrifice on the cross that we can get to the Father, that we can experience redemption and take part in his ultimate plan for mankind. There are many misconceptions about salvation in Jesus Christ, and it's even common to think that it's unattainable. But I'm here to tell you right now that God has made a way for you to be saved from the judgment to come and to become a son or a daughter by spiritual adoption, becoming an heir to a royal eternal inheritance. And I'd like to share this with you right now. Romans chapter 3 verse 10 says, "As it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one." Romans 3:23 says, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God." Let me explain this. In God's eyes, we are all seen as imperfect sinners, and we all come up short of God's standard. But here's the good news. Romans 5 verse 8 tells us that God commendeth his love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. You see, God's love for us is so powerful and great that he prepared a plan to save us, loving us even while we were living in sin apart from Christ. But the question is going to arise, where exactly does sin come from? Romans 5 verse 12 tells us, "Wherefore, as by one man sin entered into the world, and death by sin, and so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned." So you see, sin entered into the world through one man, Adam, and corrupted the perfect world that God created. And this sin and this death was then passed on to all of us in this fallen world. Romans 6:23 goes on to explain, "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord." So we see that our sin has to be paid for, and the wages of our sin is death, but we can receive the gift from God of eternal life, and we can be made clean in God's eyes, but only through Jesus Christ our Lord, as he suffered death in our place in order to pay the wages of our sin. But the question arises, how do we accept this ultimate gift of grace? Romans chapter 10 verses 9 through 11 explains that if thou shalt confess with thy mouth the Lord Jesus, and shalt believe in thine heart that God hath raised him from the dead, thou shalt be saved. For with the heart man believeth unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation. For the scripture saith, whosoever believeth on him shall not be ashamed. And furthermore, Romans 10:13 declares that whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. So in order to authentically believe in Christ, it means so much more than saying some magic words like an incantation or a spell. but it actually means to fully entrust and commit your life to the resurrected King Jesus, evidenced by real changes taking place in your life as you now live by faith in the family of God. Friends, you have an opportunity set before you in this very moment to call upon the name of the Lord and to have your sins paid in full and to be saved in Jesus Christ. It is time to lay down your pride and understand that God loves you and He has made a way for you to be made whole and righteous in His sight and to be part of the everlasting family of God, the very thing we were created for. This is truly the most important message of the ages and the most important decision you can ever make in your life. So if you're watching this video right now and you've never called upon the name of Jesus Christ, I pray that you will make this very day your day of salvation. I thank you all for watching this, and may the Holy Spirit of Christ guide you and overflow into every part of your being. God bless.